I'll just wait for the acknowledgement that we are ready to proceed. Graham and Kimberly, are we live streaming to the public? Thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, members of the board, members of the service, and to those of you who are participating from your home computers or devices. Welcome to the October meeting of the Halton Police Board. We're so glad that everybody, both on the Zoom and in the public, have joined us this morning. This meeting is called to order, and the first matter of business is to ask our secretary, are there any regrets today?
Just from Ms. Seacon, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And the members of the board, are any disclosures of conflicts of interest this morning to declare? I'm not seeing any. I'd like to draw your attention to item 1.3, which is a confirmation of the minutes held on Thursday, September 30th, 2021. You'll note that the public minutes are there, as well as the presentation from Cornell University. Can I get a motion to approve those minutes, please? Clark, and seconded by? Thank you, Ingrid. Any questions, comments, errors, or omissions? I'm not seeing any. Is there any objection to the approval of those minutes? Seeing none, the minutes are approved. We do not have any presentations or delegations to the public portion of our meeting, so I will move right along to our consent agenda this morning. We have 5 matters on our consent agenda. Members of the board, as you recall, these are items that are routine in nature, and unless actually requested for questions, we normally would approve them en masse. Are there any separations for questions or comments, members of the board? Kurt.
I have a question on 3.2, please, Mr.
3.2. Anything else?
No.
Okay, can I get a motion to approve everything but 3.2 then, please? Thank you, Clark. Seconded by? Can I get a seconder for the rest of the consent? Thank you, Ingrid. So that's a motion to approve 3.1, 3.3, 3.4, and 3.5. Any objection to the motion? Seeing none, those are approved as recommended by staff, and I will draw our attention back to 3.2. Kurt, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. My question is for the chief. Please, I noticed the vacancy level for the civilian positions. It's not alarmingly high, but it's sitting at 18, and I was just wondering if I could get a comment from you on that.
Chief, you're muted, sir.
That was the most profound thing I ever said, too.
Oh my gosh.
No, if you look on
never to be heard again.
Sorry about that. If you look on page 2, there are a couple positions that we're moving to fill in the more management area of human resources, in particular, now that Tracy is here. So we've got some very strategic hires to make there in the next hopefully the coming months. We've got some vacancies in communications. We're actually moving in the budget, you'll notice later, to increase that by 4. There's a bit of a changing times, if I could put it that way. We hired 4 dispatchers, and we had them in training just a little while ago, and I think 3 of them have left. 1 or 2 did not prefer to work midnight shifts. 1 didn't think it felt with his or her lifestyle. And so I would say 20 or 30 years ago, people were hired in our dispatch center, and it's basically it's close to $100,000 a year job within 3 years. And now people are choosing quality of life and where they live over those sorts of positions where you're going to be expected to work long hours and overtime and things like that. The other ones, we do have some openings in our clerical spots, and we've got 2 additional spots we'll talk about in the budget later on, where we will only be filling 1 of those because we need to move some dollars around for some different reasons. But we typically do run with some staff shortages on the civilian side, which ultimately lends itself when we look at the surplus that we usually have at the end of each year, which this year I think we're still trending towards 1.5 million. I would say probably close to 2 million surplus, which helps us on our reserves for other major projects.
Thank you very much, Chief. I guess my follow-up comment would be, are we satisfied that the classification levels are appropriate in the areas where we're having some challenges to hire?
Yes, I think they are, Mr. Allen. We're always looking at moving people around. You'll notice we've repurposed or repositioned a couple more civilian positions to higher positions that we needed more on a priority basis in this year's budget as well. But we typically do run with some vacancies.
Thank you. That's fine. Thanks.
Thanks, Kurt. Ingrid.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a comment that I'd like to make, and this is something we've seen likely worldwide as a result of COVID. It is an employee's market to address the area that the chief has mentioned, that of the 4 individuals, 3 have left. The employee value, the employee perspective, the employee outlook has changed dramatically and will continue to change as a result of COVID. And many employers are struggling not only with retention, but with attraction. And it is a reality that we have to acknowledge as a result of COVID, and now with hopefully a return to work, and however a return to work will look. So it will remain with us, unfortunately.
Yes,
Thank you, Ingrid.
Sure, you're right, Ingrid. Clark had a question. Oh, his hand went down.
Well, I wasn't sure because I had my hand up and you missed me. So I waved at you and then you acknowledged it. So I put my hand down. So I'm just going to start dancing. I was going to raise the point that Ingrid did, but I honestly don't think it's because of COVID. There's been labor shortages coming around for years, especially in the manufacturing sector. So I guess the question I would have, Chief, is how we compare with this number with the other services in Ontario, like in the Big 12. Like, is it consistent that this happens? The issues you mentioned of some of them deciding it doesn't fit their lifestyle or not wanting to work the shifts. Is that fairly consistent across the province?
I would say it definitely is, Mr. Somerville. We've talked a lot between ourselves and have all of our networks, of course, and we just recently got back from our first in-person conference where we touched base a little more with especially the Big 12 leaders from our perspective, and everyone's recognizing the same things, the changing demographics, changing desires of different generations. Also, I think a lot of the GTA services are also experiencing what we are, where it's a very expensive place to live. I don't know how people get into the housing market now. Entry-level houses $1 million plus in many parts of Halton. So those are all things that we're going to have to continue to be aware of and try to address as much as we can in this area. We are losing some people, probably more than we have over the last 8 or 10 years that I've been back, or certainly before that, who are repositioning themselves within the OPP so they could live in Wasaga Beach, or they can live in North Bay or somewhere where housing is half the price, and maybe they have family members there. So lots of things swirling around that. We're re-emphasizing hiring so that we're trying to hire people more often that have roots here in Halton. That doesn't mean they're going to stay here, but it may assist in that area, because there are a certain number of people that are moving away from this expensive market to return home, whatever that is. And that can be as close as Niagara or the other side of Kitchener-Waterloo. Things get to be a lot more affordable. So it's definitely a trend to add on to what Ingrid had said about the other changes.
Yeah, and it's and Mr. Chair, I'm hoping it hasn't hit you in your work establishment, but you look at a lot of the places, like seeing them advertising, they're now into the extra incentives, and that's what happens as well. And it becomes, it becomes a race to the bottom, because once incentives are adopted, everyone else gets them as well. But no, I appreciate the answer, Chief, and it was what I suspected the answer was going to be, but I'm also appreciate my colleague Kurt for holding this to ask the questions.
Thanks, Clark. I can just add that you raised my my private sector business, and I will say that I've had one job that's been posted for over 3 months, and I've had 3 applicants, none of which have been qualified for the position. So I do know that those of us that have private sector businesses or obligations are facing similar circumstances, and I know a number of my colleagues in my industry are facing the same thing. I saw Deputy Wilkie's hand up, so you have the floor, sir.
Morning, everyone, and through the chair, I just got one comment to Mr. Allen's original question, and that this report is simply a snapshot in time of vacancies, and we do have a number of processes underway to actually fill those spots. So it's not a situation where we can't fill this because of the retention issues. We have processes and people are in the mix, and we are hiring to fill many of those vacancies. So it's not as dire as it may look.
Okay, thank you, Deputy. Anything further on this?
Yeah, if I
Sorry,
may,
Kurt.
Mr.
Yep.
If I may, Mr. Chair, just in response to Deputy Wilkie and Deputy, thank you very much for your comment. I didn't interpret it as a dire situation. We're looking at what, roughly 300 civilian positions, and there's 18 of them that are vacant at the time this snapshot was taken. I think my point is more around in communications, dispatchers and stuff like that. I know, those kind of responsibilities, where people are dealing on the telephone with distraught people. That's a difficult task at the best of times, and they're important positions. And I would just urge us to make sure that we have the classification levels of those positions appropriate, so that they are actually attracting the right kind of people and we are able to staff them. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. I would also say we're acutely aware to the stresses in that particular area because of what they deal with, plus the shift work and the rotations and the stress and the likelihood of PTSD in there, just as much as some of our frontline uniform folks who are facing something, these members are dealing with it on a daily basis.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, everybody, for your comments. Kurt, would you mind giving me a motion to approve this staff report, please? So moved. Seconded by, please. Seconder. Thank you. Don, any further comments or questions? Any objections to the approval? Seeing none, those are approved, and we have concluded the consent portion of the agenda. We'll move on to our discussion items, and I note that we have a number of very important issues on our discussion items this morning, not the least of which is our budget matters. I'm going to use my prerogative in the chair just to rearrange the agenda slightly. I would like to deal with 4.1 and 4.3 together, as opposed to breaking up with the governance policies, because they are related. I just want to ask the CGO, do you want to speak to the governance budget before we deal with the overall budget, or are you satisfied to wait until the overall budget's presented? Because I know that there's a potential modification there.
Yes, there is. It's a minor one, but I could definitely speak to that first, if that's what you prefer, Mr. Chair.
Okay, I think that makes sense because it will inform the other discussion. So why don't we move 4.3 up, and I'll give you the floor, Fred, just to run through the governance budget then.
Sure. So the budget that you have in your package, I'll just introduce the main portions. So the board's role and tasks are front and center of the proposed budget, and those come from policy G02, board role, which you adopted last month. That's followed by the results that are expected to be achieved with this proposed budget. And those 3 results are actually, you assigned them to me in August or September as a result of the retreat held in July. And those are for actually for 18-month objectives. In the budget itself, there's a slight increase to board member remuneration to align with the anticipated the forecast for year end. There's a realignment of staffing costs, which includes the new CGO contract that you approved in June. And so basically there is some reduction in the policy consultant support. There's a significant increase in conferences from what the forecast is for this year, and that's of course assuming that in the next year we'll return to in-person conferences for board training. And so finally, and there's an adjustment for tax, which we previously weren't accounting for. There's a residual tax, which is covered in our budgets. So the largely because the board ramped up its governance evolution program in the current year, we're anticipating a forecasted over expenditure on the governance budget this year in 2021 of a roughly $52,000. And we're asking for 25,000 more for next year to cover those increased costs and programs that I've outlined in the results, and to ensure that the board's role, as it's described in its own policy, is supported, properly supported. So that's the total budget requested is $481,830, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Questions?
I just wanted to draw out a point here that there is a disconnection between that requested allocation and the budget submitted by the service. Could you address that, please?
Yeah, sure. It's basically everybody's, we're working on a compressed timetable, and it's just a matter of ensuring that we're all informed along the way. Of course, the submission to regional staff is prior to the board's deliberation on this matter.
Right. So how much is the additional? Do you have that number?
15,000.
Okay. I just wanted to, is Paul aware of that now? I know that, okay, that's great.
This is probably the first he's heard of it, unless he read the report.
I saw him nodding his head. So
yeah,
I think,
okay.
Paul, do you mind addressing that before I go to the board?
Go ahead, Chief, first.
Yeah, no, certainly, Mr. Chair, we're aware of that, and going through the packages, we're aware of that. It's the budget that we have submitted is essential for what we need. We'll basically absorb the difference in the board budget. The 20 some odd thousand will come out of whatever the surplus would have been at the end of next year.
Okay, so it's been, when we go into that portion of the budget, you will have accounted for that, and so will not become an issue for regional council. Is that correct?
I don't think it should, not that amount and in the overall amount that we're
yeah, it's pretty, relatively speaking, it's a fairly small amount, and it's just really due to the timing of preparing all of this
That's right.
budget paperwork. Paul, did you have anything further to add, or did the chief?
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Steal your thunder?
All good. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Fred, thank you for the report. Members of the board, you have the board governance budget before you. You did have an opportunity to review it previously at our workshop. Do you have any further questions or comments on it? Clark.
Yeah, yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So Fred, I'm just wondering, I think that because this budget is different, where we have the result-based evaluation system that is mentioned in there. Can you just speak to that for a couple minutes, so that for anyone who might be tuning in,
sure.
wondering, because that's a bit of a change, and I think it's it'd be important for us to highlight that as well.
So historically, the budgets have been prepared to talk about board activity, like the number of meetings, the number of board members. So basically resources and activities. This budget is presented to describe 3 specific results for the calendar year 2022. It does list the board's responsibilities, which are essentially it's decision activities. But the three results are a modernized policy manual. We're very close to completing the governance portions already. We're ahead of schedule, and we'll be working on the administrative policies, revamping all of those to be complete in 2022. An updated strategic planning process, which is driven by the new Community Safety and Policing Act, which we expect to come into force early in 2022, and which places significantly more emphasis on the board's role in strategic planning, and particularly with regards to stakeholder engagement and what the board does with as a result of stakeholder engagement. And the third, so that basically that planning process deserves to be revamped, and that's the result that you've assigned me, and if I counted for it there, I've forecasted some additional money required in 2023 to action that new process, which is in your report. And then finally a results-based evaluation system, which flows from this whole results-based governance theme the board had for its retreat, and its decision of the September meeting to make results-based governance essential to everything it does. So currently our evaluation systems are not specifically tied to results. They're very much, again, historically for the sector, driven by resources and activities rather than what's achieved with those. So it's a fundamental shift in how the board will be evaluating its programs and services. Does that answer your question, Clark?
Thank you. I think I saw Kurt's hand up a second. Yes, Kurt, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much. I just like to build on what Clark's question and Fred's answer a little bit. There's no question this is a significant number, and it is an increase in the budget. However, I think the board needs to come to grips with the fact that there have been legislative and regulatory changes that I think we're a little bit behind on, and there are more coming. And so therefore, I support this budget. This isn't necessarily the type of budget that this board will be confronted with, I don't think, on the long term. I think it's a short-term increase in our costs to bring our governance in line. And as Fred has said, the strategic planning process needs to be upped. There are other reports and outcomes that need to be upped. And for those very important reasons, I support this budget.
Thank you, Kurt. Are there further comments or questions? Can I get a motion to approve the budget request? Kurt and Clark, thank you very much. Further comments or questions? I have just a very quick one before we go to the vote. I just want to thank Fred for his work on this and his work for the board up to this point. And I truly appreciate the level of analysis that's gone into justifying this budget. I do think that we've taken on a big task as the civilian governors of our police service here in Halton to reform our governance and to come up to the standards that Kurt referred to. And I do think that it is a good value for dollar in terms of creating that excellence in governance that we strive for. And I am thoroughly enthusiastic about moving forward with our plan and to make sure the plan is properly resourced so that we're not simply paying lip service to it, that we actually have some real tools to actually get the work done. So thank you to Fred for your hard work, and thank you to the board for your what appears to be support for this budget. And with that, I will ask, are there any objections to the approval of the budget? I don't see any, so that is now approved, and we can move on to the larger piece, and that is the service budget. And who is going to take us through that presentation? I guess, Chief, will you frame that?
Certainly, and Paul is sharing the screen here, so does everyone have that? Maybe just by a show of hands.
We do, yes, sir.
Okay. Well, first of all, it's always a pleasure to present our budget to the
And on the
board. Certainly, we've been able to have some discussions around some of the increases in different areas, the demands in different areas of the service. Certainly one
Why is
that
it
was
disappearing?
highlighted in our earlier discussion this
What is it?
morning is our 911 communication center, which is one of the priorities
So
for
that's there?
increased staffing
Okay.
in this budget. And I won't read all of these screens. These are screens that we include each year and certainly are a part of our presentation to Regional Council when Chair Knoll, you and I will go to present this to Regional Council at whatever level is approved in just a couple of weeks in November. But we identify every opportunity to try to bolster the safety and well-being of everyone here in Halton. And we're extremely proud of our year-over-year results, which do not come without an investment. And certainly thank the board and Regional Council and different levels of government who help to fund us to varying degrees. But it is an increasingly expensive undertaking, particularly in a region such as Halton, which is growing so rapidly. As we see the growth that's still coming, particularly for those in Oakville and the Trafalgar-Dundas corridor, but even more so in the town of Milton, and to some degree, and certainly in Halton Hills and Burlington as well. So we want to remain the safest large municipality in all of Canada. We've held that ranking for quite some time, and we'll go through some of those on slides coming up. So go ahead, Paul. And these are just a couple of them, but we talk about overall crime severity index, violent crime and nonviolent separated out from there. And we are first when we measure ourselves against all large municipalities. That's municipalities over 100,000 across Canada, not just Ontario. And in addition to that, of the 400 some odd municipalities of all sizes, and I think that's 5,000 and up in population, there are only 12 or 13. They tend to be around 15 or less thousand in population that have a lower crime severity index than us. So it's really no comparison to a municipality of 6,000 or 7,000 or 35,000 that happens to be a little bit lower. We're in a very good position, and we are certainly benefit from some of the socioeconomic levels that we have here in Halton Region. Perhaps less unemployment than some of our neighbors, even more so directly to the east and west of us, who are impacted in different ways on the crime front. But we're particularly proud of the last two measures as well, and that is our weighted clearance rate, because even though we have significantly less officers or staff per citizen here in Halton, which leads to our cost per capita being the lowest of all the comparable services, we also have the highest weighted clearance rate. So that certainly speaks very highly of our investigators and our frontline staff who, even through COVID and before COVID and after COVID, perform very admirably. Next slide, Paul. We always look at the corporate business plan and the four key themes which we've developed. This is the board's business plan, which we follow each and every year. There's certainly key sections and themes within that plan, community safety and well-being, and the board would know that we are heavily invested along with the region of Halton and many stakeholders across the region, from school boards, hospitals, mental health organizations, alcohol and addiction experts, Canadian Mental Health, ROC, and so many others that collaborate in that community safety and well-being in the greater picture. And Jeff, I know you and Fred and maybe others have attended one of those meetings. I'd encourage board members to attend those even as observers. When we did the next one, we'll probably still be online. We always have to look at our capability and engagement. What are we doing for our members? What are we capable of? What do we need? Where do we need more resources? And there are some strategic areas now that have been with us for a few years, but I would say are ever expanding, and that would come around the areas of cybercrime, internet childhood exploitation, child pornography on the internet, the deep dark web. How do we investigate money laundering and serious organized crime and cryptocurrency? because it's not all follow normal bank accounts anymore. And there'll certainly be a presentation at a later time on some of the organized crime impacts in the region of Halton, street gangs, traditional organized crime, and cybercrime. So within each of those 4 themes, we have established goals. That's an annual process, and that is what we really focus on and look at when we're building this budget for each year. Next slide, Paul. Within this framework, and we like to highlight, and this is probably more so for regional council when we go there, but we always look to maximize the deployment of officers to emerging trends, such as our homicide changes in this budget to increase by 1 sergeant and 1 constable. Our cybercrime unit, we're looking at a full-time technical cybercrime computer tech unit in the years ahead, and frontline duties. And that's where you see the main emphasis and the main driver of the increased budget above the 3.7 guideline in this presented budget at 4.2, is that we will be able to, within those dollars, add 12 frontline constables. That happens to align to 12 uniform platoons across our region, 4 uniform platoons in each of 3 districts. So by doing that, 12 additional officers, I really think it's going to have an impact on our front line. It is an issue that's being raised by President Gillis and other frontline members, feeling that they have not had significant or sufficient officers added there in recent years to keep up with growth and demand. But we'll also discuss how we are redeploying some other frontline units to our frontline platoons to further bolster that. Upgrade and replace frontline technology tools. As board members, you'll know some of the major investments that we make in technology, anything from our encrypted Motorola P25 radio system to our LTE PSBN network, and all the great work that we continue to do with Bill Payne, our director of IT, along with our partners in Peel, and now so many partners across Ontario and Canada that are joining into that LTE PSBN project. And it really has taken on a life of its own, and we'll do a presentation to update the board on how massive and how impressive that is becoming. We also are looking at the consolidated 1 district facility from a capital budget perspective, working along with regional staff. That is moving along. It will probably, I would say, unfortunately, not arrive here until sometime in 2025. I'd rather it be here next year, but that's the way chiefs think sometimes, because we're long overdue for it. But very cooperative relationship and ongoing working with Jane McCaskill, the CAO of the region, and finance staff and land acquisition staff to greatly decrease the direct impact on our capital budget and vis-a-vis our operating budget in years moving forward. Peel principles, we always mention that may be a hangover from a different era where someone always wanted that in here, but it is important. We are the public and the public are us, and we live here and we're parts of this community, and we work with our community to make this community the safest that we can. COVID-19, let's hope that at some point we can say it's more or less behind us. I think it's always going to be here to some degree, but it'll take on a different form, hopefully sometime next year. And we also, I don't want to forget the second to last bullet point there, and it's sort of been a comment that many of us have made publicly, including board chairs and board members, but it's about basically looking after our members here. And the board of the region and the service have invested greatly in our member wellness and our commitment to organizational and individual wellness, including a very high cap on what a certain members could use when it comes to psychological or psychiatric counseling support. But we also invest in other things, our safeguard program, preventative program for members who serve in high risk areas within the service or high risk types of investigations. We also have, as you know, our full-time organizational wellness unit. We are anticipating retirements and changes in that area, and that is the one exception in this budget where the one additional constable will not be going directly to the front line. But our proposal is that we need to increase our organizational wellness unit by one person because of the workload that's in there. If you can imagine, we're now at a point where if we have a critical incident or an incident that may cause a great deal of stress for any individual or individuals, and we can never judge what that incident may be, but in the most serious of accidents or sudden deaths or homicides or house fires and a variety of tragic situations, we have our organizational wellness unit available to reach out to our members almost immediately. If there's only 2 people there, they feel that they're pretty much on call 24 hours a day, or at least one of them has to be. So this is really about returning them home after their shifts, where they're taking on a lot of the stress and the concern of the members that they're serving. So I think it's a very worthwhile investment in increasing our organizational wellness unit. Next page, Paul. We do have some risks, and we always highlight some of the risks. We do have continued population growth. With population growth comes usually increased calls for service, demand for service. I was just reflecting late last night and early this morning on the changes to Oakville and Burlington since I started in 1982, and what roads would have been there or what subdivisions would have been there. Glen Abbey was just starting in the early 1980s. When I was in high school in Oakville, there was nothing north of the QEW, basically, except farmlands. So we are policing a very much larger geographic area, roads, traffic, and certainly citizens. At that point, I think Burlington and Oakville were both about 100 or about 80,000 people. So we look at where our populations are trending now. The impact of provincial funding decisions, we may or may not see decreases in funding in this area. I'm always concerned with changes to our courts and our justice system, what's going to happen to what we are normally used to receiving from the province, in particular, when it comes to prisoner care and transportation and recouping that. In my view, the province for many, many years could have ran that program separately, probably more efficiently and for less money. But for a variety of reasons, political and otherwise, they've always chosen to subsidize the police service to do those duties, which we have, and we're certainly responsible under the Municipal Act and other acts for courthouses which are within our jurisdiction. So it is somewhat convoluted and complicated. But we do have some concern that now that we are transporting far less prisoners on a daily basis, that those programs may be targeted at the provincial level. And they are going to be looking for savings coming out of COVID and otherwise. But at the same time, and I would say publicly here in this public meeting, the ridiculous decision to completely stop the building of a new consolidated courthouse in the region of Halton has resulted in a variety of other complicating factors. The old courthouse in Milton has been closed for some time now and will remain closed for mold issues and otherwise. And we've moved the local courts, or Ministry of the Attorney General has moved local courts into the Burlington Convention Center, which is one location for us to look after and to secure. And they've made a decision to move into another private sort of facility within a kilometer or two of that Burlington Convention Center and open a second court, which is going to give us another location to secure in some instances. And as you can imagine, these facilities can be retrofitted to some degree, but on the security level, if or when we get to, or for example, homicide, murder trials and drug-related trials or outlaw motorcycle gang-related investigations and court processes, these facilities are certainly totally inadequate. We also have increase in benefit costs. So we've Paul can break down some of that if any board members would like, but health and dental is certainly going up. And one of the trends that we know is here with us for this coming budget presentation and for the region of Halton is increased in the area of life insurance. That's partly coming through COVID. It's partly some tragic situations where individuals have passed away, not necessarily work related, but it's all life insurance issues. And Paul can certainly provide further comment if necessary. Our continued growth in technology and communication costs. And I know we've talked about from time to time the fact that you used to buy a system or I will call it a computer system, and you'd pay for it up front and there'd be a little bit of service costs. And most of that industry have moved to more of a yearly licensing types of fees and subscription types of fees. So there are ongoing costs with all of those very important investments in technology and communications, but they certainly come with a cost. Increased in fuel costs. It's interesting right now with fuel being upwards of $1.75 for premium, but most of our vehicles do not use that. But for every 10 cents that fuel goes up, it would be about $130,000 annually. We typically budget at around $1.30, which is the same or comparable with the region of Halton level that they budget for. Over the last year, that was a bit of a savings for us, and will assist with the surplus at the end of this year. Next year, we're not so sure. Some economists I was listening to yesterday are projecting that fuel costs may stay up for a few more months. They might come down in May or June of next year, but that's driven by a lot of different COVID or not so much COVID related issues. We may have inflation beyond our current expectations. We will be going, or the board will be going into contract negotiations sometime later next year. I have had some indication from the association they may like to bargain sooner and get things wrapped up and done with the board. So there's certainly negotiations, contract negotiations, benefits, et cetera, which are a little bit of an unknown moving past 2022, but we have our contract already in place for next year. And then of course the impact of COVID-19. And Paul?
Yep. Come on. There we go. Okay, thank you, Chief. On to the financial information slides. This is a standard format that we use along with the region to present our budget in comparison to the 2021 budget between the 6 major cost elements and cost groupings and the revenue groupings as well. So the first thing that we always highlight is that the majority of the $7.1 million increase is coming from the personnel line, and that's consistent year by year. This year, the personnel costs are increasing by $5 million. That consists of 2 major elements. The first 3.2 million of that is related to our collective agreement, all of our step ups, our benefit costs, et cetera. So in our base budget, compensation goes up by 3.2 million of the 5 million. We then have our growth in our staffing requirements. That growth, including all of the resources and equipment that goes with those new officers and civilians, is another $1.8 million. So that's the $5 million. It's essentially base budget growth and then our growth in our staffing requirements to amount to the $5 million. A couple other notable items in this slide: purchased services. You'll notice that it's going up by $1.4 million. And that's primarily coming from, as the chief mentioned earlier, the cost of our investment in all of our technology. The cost for our support for software and hardware is increasing. The biggest component of this 1.4 is 1.1 million from IT support for hardware and software. Next couple notable items, really there's not much else. The biggest components are personnel and IT, but you'll notice in revenue that we're decreasing our revenue by $200,000. And that's primarily from a decrease in our court security and prisoner transportation grant from the province. We've based that on our prior year's actual number. So we're expecting that number to be, at the moment, $150,000. lower on the revenue side. So all in all, we are increasing by 4.2% or $7.1 million, and that embeds the 16 officers and 8 civilians that we have in our staffing requests.
Paul, I was just thinking maybe flip to page 41. It's a little different look, but I know some people are more visual than numbers. And
no, I think that's not 41 anymore, Chief. Hang on.
no, sorry, the pie chart.
Yep. There we go.
And we
So-
usually, and we can certainly include this in any subsequent presentation to the region, Chair Knoll. But this really breaks it down slightly different by percentages. But you can see the compensation increase alone consumes 1.3. The staffing increase proposed in total is 1.1. And then there are the benefit costs, technology, and all other costs lumped in here, which Paul would have broken out slightly more and spoken to in that previous slide with the numbers. So I just wanted to, I thought it was more preferable to share this with the board at this point to show that breakdown. Thanks, Paul.
Yep. Okay, so moving on, our staffing requests for 2022, as we've met, the chief has mentioned as well. Frontline officers, 12, 1 for each platoon, then some specialized units. Civilian staffing, you'll note that we actually have approved 10 positions, but we're using up 3 of the vacancies that Mr. Allen asked about earlier. Each year we take a look at all of our civilian requests and determine if we can redeploy available resources. Are the positions that are vacant, are they still needed? Are they being filled? And if not, can we use them to fill some of the new civilian requests? And in 2022, we've identified 3 of them that could offset. So we have a net of 7 civilians and 1 civilian moving from contract to full-time. So the only increased cost from that conversion is essentially benefits. So call it $10,000 to $15,000. Chief, did you want to comment on staffing?
The only thing I wanted to add here is there is a slight change. I had an opportunity to speak with Chair Knoll just very briefly. And we did change from 15 sworn members to 16. The main change is the deputies and I had some extensive meetings around where some of our greatest needs or priorities should be, or needs are. And the inspector that we're adding is actually to be the full-time senior officer to look after our strategic management office, our planning, our analytics, and strategic management program implementation. Up until now, that area has been overseen by a superintendent with no inspector, but the superintendent was also responsible for areas such as communications and records, which are large areas of great number of staff in each of those areas and different responsibilities. We really want to put the priority back on strategic management, realign. We have a total of 6 superintendents. So we're realigning some of the work for those more senior officers. 3 of them are in our districts. There's no change there. And Superintendent Kilmahar will continue to be in charge of our regional investigative services. But there are some other major areas here at headquarters that we can divvy up much more effectively, we think, between the 2 superintendents, and the increase by 1 inspector will put the emphasis back on the strategic management area. So that's the main change from any earlier discussions we had where the increase was 15. The 16th person here is the inspector. That will not be any further increase to this budget presentation. We have 2 civilian positions. We're going to need to prioritize which one of those to fill, but we will reallocate those dollars to fund this inspector. So we're not asking for more money for this change. We'll do that internally, but it's definitely a very worthwhile, in our view, reallocation of those funds.
And if I can just go back 1 slide for a second, I always make this point, the first 90% of our budget is personnel costs. The next 6% is material supplies and purchase services. So by the time we get to the end of the 3rd line, which are primarily base budget plus special asks, we're at 90%, 96% of our budget. So We have limited flexibility beyond that. So staffing's been discussed, and Chief, just the impact of new frontline officers.
Well, we always have questions about, what's the right level of staffing, but I think we really are getting down to, and my words would be bare minimums when it comes to what we are sometimes able to put on the road on a 24-hour basis. Some of this, arguably, and we argue these same positions, are the perhaps conflicting demand between wanting enough people working and wanting time off. Time off is critical to our frontline members. There's no doubt. It's quality of life, it's mental health related, and we want to be able to give our members time off. But we probably in reality have some supervisors who are a little more careful, if I use that word, to not let too many people off and go too low on the staffing side. But every person, and we're making this point through our district commanders down to our staff sergeants and sergeants who run each of those uniform platoons. We are not adding another person to your platoons so that another person can have the day or the night off all the time. We're hearing the concerns from our frontline members, from Clay Gillis from the association, sometimes from supervisors, through a survey that the association did, and we certainly have ongoing discussions about that. But it's important to have, this will not keep up with growth, but it will help us not fall as much further behind. So it is important. And I think one of the board members asked during an information session on staffing, what will these people do? I mean, frontline officers are emergency responders. So it's important that we have a critical mass of people 24 hours a day. Certainly, we do not need as many people here at 3 a.m. as we do at 3 or 4 p.m. We have peak times. We have very detailed analytical heat maps, which address when normally major calls for service or the peak in number of calls for service happen. But we have some slower times typically as well. It's just in policing, you never know when something major is going to happen. So you have to have a certain number of staff available. Every frontline officer, we expect and will continue to expect, do a certain amount of traffic enforcement. It's hard to put a number to that. If every officer gave out 16 tickets per month, they would give out 180 or 90 tickets in a year on the enforcement side, and they'd have just as many or twice as many interactions of an educational sort of nature with drivers that may make our roads safer. Does traffic enforcement, does it have a one-to-one ratio correlation with safer roads? Probably not, but it does have some impact, and there's also the deterrent of visibility. So it's important to have at least the minimal staffing that we feel that we need. I can go on at different points later on, or if asked about what some other local services are looking at in increasing by 25, 35, or 45 officers next year compared to this year. We're not asking for that. This is a very middle of the road, conservative, small c conservative request for a little bit more funding to be able to add 1 officer per platoon this year. And you'll see of the 12 of the 16, that's where they're going.
Okay, thank you, Chief. The next 2 slides deal with our financial forecast for the next 5 years. This is a requirement of our process in the region that we do forecast. I'm going to jump to the second slide quickly. The first slide we have is just the forecast in our standard 7 cost element format. You'll notice we're starting 2022 at $175 million, ending at $208 million. The next slide is a little bit more interesting in terms of the information we present. So you'll see, as the chief mentioned, that our budget increase is expected over the next few years to be in the 4.2 to 4.4% range. And we're forecasting that now. We have been forecasting that in the last few years as we present our budget to regional council. And we need to have those officers, the growth in staffing, to meet the growth in demand that we have in the service and to meet our needs. So we are giving continued advice or information to the region that we do expect our budgets to be in the 4.2 to 4.4% range. We've made a number of assumptions as we go forward into our 5-year forecast. We've looked at the growth, we've looked at our needs for staffing, and as you can see, we're increasing our sworn officers in the next few years by a little bit more than we normally do. Typically, we're in the 12 to 14 range. We're going up 16 to 18 each year for the next few years. You'll see our civilians are increasing as well. The net impact of that is a stabilization at a cop per pop ratio of 1.2. Now, 1.2 is where we've been at for the last little while. And if you bear with me for 1 second, I'll jump to a slide. Yeah, maybe I can't get it quickly. So 1.2 is still significantly less than what it was in 2015, 2013 timeframe. If we were back at our 2015 level, we would be about 38 officers higher than we are right now. Cost per capita, as the chief mentioned in one of our very first slides, we're consistently the lowest cost per capita amongst the Big 12 police services, and we expect to continue with that achievement over the next several years, even with these increases as you see them here.
We can say that, I'll just interject quickly, but we can say that with a certain degree of confidence because we know that the next closest comparable police service to us on the cost per population stage, we would have to hire 60 more officers. Pretty much, I've talked about this number every year over the past 2 or 3 years, but we would have to hire 60 officers to bring our cost per capita up to what their cost per capita already is. And we know in one instance, they're looking at adding somewhere between 25 and 45 more officers this year. So if we had 12 and they had 20 next year, we would have to add 70 to get up to their level. Not saying their level's right, so don't take that out of context at all. But when we look around at different comparables, those are one of the things that we look at. We benefit from a lower crime rate and a lower crime severity index. So there are reasons that other police services, and use Windsor as an example, Windsor needs more money invested per citizen because of a very high crime rate and a high crime severity index. So it's not apples to apples by any means, but this is a very conservative approach to this request.
So our next slide is a representation of the year-over-year budget increases since 1999, plus the 4 years of the forecast. You'll notice that, after several years of some pretty dramatic swings, from about 2010 on and then 2013 on, we've been in a pretty consistent slot. And we've mapped on top of this chart this year the growth in the officers year over year. So not surprisingly, with 90% of our budget being related to compensation costs, those two lines should flow similarly.
This is usually where I can't resist saying that I came back here in about 2012. But Chair Knoll could probably say that that's about the time he joined the Police Services Board. So yeah, things have been relatively stable over these past 10 years.
Correct.
There's not necessarily a direct correlation between those two factors, but it may have helped.
Yeah. Our next slide is a discussion of our 10-year capital forecast. We have 3 major categories: our infrastructure, which is our buildings. You'll note that we're adding $3 million next year and $2 million in 2023 for the one district build. Those numbers have been in our capital forecast for the last few years, so there's no change there. Our capital programs relate to our essentially base case scenarios. We need to continue to invest in our computer equipment, our servers, our vehicles, and our buildings and furniture in order to maintain a service level comparable from one year to the next. So those 3 areas in the capital programs amount to, I guess that's almost $5 million. Capital projects, we separate those into 2 major categories. Technology projects, $2.2 million. And that's primarily for a new HRIS system, continued investment in the PSBN data transmission capability, some enhancements on our P25 radio system, et cetera. And then on the operational projects, there's a number of different items in here, but primarily it's a continuation of supporting the programs we already have in place. So for example, our in-car camera system, the storage requirements for police video, whether it's in-car camera or body worn, doing a body worn pilot, maintaining the technical capability of our mobile command units, replacing a robot in the explosive disposals unit, et cetera. So those operational projects are requested and reviewed each year. And our operational project capital requirement for next year is $1.7 million. So if there are any questions?
I can't see every member of the board, so if you have a question, you might want to speak up just because I may not be able to see you.
We're getting to the end of the presentation and we have a Q&A slide, so we can.
Okay, so why don't we wait for then, Paul, then, okay, before we ask for questions?
Sure.
Thank
Perfect.
you.
So Chief, back to you.
Well, we always wrap up, and again, this is more probably at this point intended for board members to know what we will be saying to regional council, but we want to, from this budget that we are putting forward as a request, we want to be able to keep Halton the safest large municipality, continue to lead our Big 12 and far beyond the Big 12 in all those important measures when it comes to safety and security throughout our region, and the crime rate, crime severity index, and those measures. The PBSN project, that should be a very extensive presentation separately to the board on how that project is going. It's got great implications for the future for safety across probably the country in a lot of different ways. And some people in the United States are looking at how we are doing what we're doing. And I say we, the Bill Paynes and Phil Srinkos and Anthony O'Duarty is still very much involved now as a deputy chief from Peel, but a tremendous project. And we want to develop and enhance partnerships, as we all do, by championing relationships with our diverse communities. And I think, excuse me, I think we're really far ahead of many other police services, police boards, regional municipalities when it comes to our relationships with our diverse communities. We've seen that over the past year and a half. We saw it through some of the Black Lives Matters campaigns and marches, which were very peaceful and lawful here. Young people voicing their concern about something terrible that had happened, and about systemic discrimination and racism. And we all stand united against those sorts of things. And I think when we launched our Black History Month, the vehicle here to highlight the richness and the importance of Black history here in Halton and beyond Halton, it was a wonderful thing to see the support from our Black community. I think Andrew Terrell has maybe now joined us again. He was online and then had to leave, and I think he's back, and Richard Pinnock has now left. But the representatives and our partners from the Canadian Caribbean Association of Halton, back many, many years through Veronica Terrell and others, it's been a great thing here. And Sergeant Ryan Smith continues to foster new relationships and keep the old ones, the fires in the hearts of the old ones, burning as well. So it's a good news story here, and we have every intention to keep that going, and also look for future opportunities for innovation. And Paul, there is that one slide we talked about. I think it was slide 43 before, that just shows the population. And this is just a graphic of our population here in Halton since 2013, with the blue line showing the increase in hundreds of thousands of people, and the red line just being the indicator of our cop to population ratio, and where that has gone. So while we continue to invest in policing and the cost of policing has gone up, it does not keep pace, obviously, with population, and that ought not to be a 1-to-1 ratio. I'm not suggesting that both lines should, completely parallel one another by any means. It's just what's the what can we do adequate and effective policing for, and ensure that our members are not only have enough members on the road 24 hours a day to protect the public, but there are enough people there on those platoons that the officers themselves feel safe. Part of that's a management issue and a time off management issue, not completely staffing, but staffing is a part of it. And again, that's the reason for the increased request for those 12 frontline officers this year within the total of 16. So subject to any questions, and we do have other slides if they're relevant to any questions board members may have. This is the request. The only change here from what might have been in your earlier written package is that number 16 for sworn members, and the increase in civilian members will go from 8 to 7 because we will find those dollars for that increased inspector position. So this would be the recommendation to the board, and I think typically, Mr. Chair, the board uses this as sort of as your resolution if you have a vote on resolution need. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Paul. Could you remove the shared screen so I can see my friends here? Thank you very much. I know I have a question from Councillor Somerville. Clark, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chief, I asked the question before about the of Fred about the board's budget because of all the policies and the way that we are changing and doing some of the things. So I asked that as a tee up to your presentation. Asked it on purpose because of some of the policies and the changes that we're making as well on the result-based governance. But I guess the question I would have for you is that on the Big 12, you touched on it about what some of the other services are looking at for potential increases this year. Can you just highlight those for us as well?
Yeah, I would not do this under oath, but what I can say is in discussions with other police leaders and with what we've seen in the media lately, the Peel Regional Police Services Board, I believe yesterday or the day before, approved their budget increase at 4.9%, which would, if you compared them, if they were totally equal, it would be 0.7%, but more than the 4.2 we're asking for. But it's also on a base budget that's probably double or more of our 175 that we'll be going to. Waterloo Regional Police have been projecting that their budget increase would be at 7.9%, I believe, before they add staff. And then they're presenting, I think, 3 scenarios to the board at 25, 35, and 45. I may have those numbers slightly off, Paul. Additional officers. So I think their budget may range, if what I've read is accurate for this discussion purpose, somewhere between 7.9% and 11 or 12%. Guelph Police, I know the chief in Guelph spoke publicly at a conference meeting saying they will be between 6 and 7. Toronto Police, to show the other end of the scale, I think politically one of the things they've been asked to do is present a 0% budget, which would mean laying off between 300 and 500 officers, and they're probably between 500 and 700 understaffed already, depending on the source of that sort of information. So I don't think they're going to be at 0, but they will probably be less than 4.2, just full disclosure of things that I'm aware of. I think Hamilton will be somewhere around where we are. If that helps, Clark.
It helps tremendously, Chief, because, we all know, especially during the early days of the pandemic, we were getting, and I think I can speak for Jeff very safely on this, the amount of calls we were getting about speeding and traffic issues. And, like we see the tremendous success of the commercial vehicle unit when it's out, and projects like Project Noisemaker. They're the ones that the public that have, the public likes to see them. They have great benefits. So to me, a budget where we are, increasing the number of frontline officers And, with us wanting to have the results, and hopefully we can, we can see results coming from that. This is a budget that I would gladly move, Mr. Chair, at the appropriate time, because, it's responsible. We've had the evolving world in the last 18 months, and it's not done evolving, but, being able to do that as well. Every time, Chief, there is information on about the commercial vehicle unit, we get positive responses back from it. And you have to explain to it that, well, they're targeting the vehicles they pull over. It's not just random, and people have that great appreciation of seeing that. Project Noisemaker is one that you could put that in every municipality in Halton, and with great success, because again, it has, people see the results from that as well. So I do thank you for that. I thank you for the information on what the other services are looking at, because as the easiest thing in the world to do for a budget would be to say to do it at zero. The reality of it is that if we want to be able to continue being the safest region in the country, that we do have to do that, and we do have to make sure we are hiring the frontline officers and the support staff that we need for them. Those are my comments, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Clark. It's kind of a well-known thing in the political world that zero-based budgets are political budgets, or not zero-based, I should say, but zero budgets are political budgets. Zero-based budgets are a management tool. But when budgets come back with 0% increases, it means that something is being lost somewhere down the road, and it's done for political reasons. And we can't be running the police service, for headlines of 0% increases when there's actual need. And I want to echo the comments that Clark made about Project Noisemaker, and about that real, on the street presence of our staff. It was critical, particularly during the pandemic when everybody was at home and paying more attention to what's happening in the neighborhoods. It was well received and well appreciated, and I'm completely supportive of Clark's comments. He spoke well for all of us elected folk in his sentiments, and I will accept your motion to approve the resolution when we're done with our questions. Any further questions from members of the board? Kurt, you have the floor, sir.
Well, thank you very much for the presentation. I really appreciate it. Building on the workshop that we had several days ago, this obviously isn't the budget that I wanted to support, but recognizing that we have to resource our police service to meet our risks, our community risks, and I think especially our emerging risks. We can't expect the service to do the work if we don't resource it. I think going forward, unquestionably, part of our challenge is going to be how we focus on efficiency. I don't think the answer is always going to be in human resources. It will be somewhat, but it also needs to be in leading edge technology. The chief and others have mentioned certain crime issues. I think organized crime is gaining a toehold in our region and all regions, and I probably focus less on cost per officer per community and probably more on how effective we are as organized crime grows without budget restrictions. We have to make sure that we're able to address it. And there are areas that the police are involved in by default, unquestionably, mental health and others being one of them. But until such time as those kinds of things change, if ever they do, we are involved in them and they have to be dealt with. The chief mentioned racism. That's an area that maybe in some ways it's COVID related, I don't know, but there are those kinds of things, and bullying, and there was another report in social media this morning about a bullying incident in one of our communities. I think all of those areas are areas that society has come to understand that we don't want to exist. And so, reluctantly, as I said, I think this is a fair budget. I've been through these situations in the past, and I think we can either step up to the plate now or step up to the plate in double form in a few years' time if we don't start to address the emerging risks at the present time. So I'm happy to support the budget and to second the motion.
Thank you very much, Kurt. Chief.
Yeah, I just wanted to say one other thing that we've touched on. It's not necessarily a direct input in the budget, and that's mental health. So when we shine a little light on that dark corner over there, we know that we deal with multiple mental health calls every day. Our officers do. Pros and cons, and it's going to be very expensive to have it done another way, but society can look for that way in the future. But just as importantly is that mental health within the organization of our individual members. And when we have the organizational wellness unit, which is extremely busy helping our members, which is a good thing, it also highlights the need that those members have for that support. And when we say to our members, it's okay to not be okay, and it's okay to talk about the issues that you're having, PTSD or otherwise, and we want you to do what you need to do to get the help that you can, that invariably means that sometimes they are not able to come to work. So a part of a staffing issue that we will always have, and probably will have increasingly in the future, are the number of frontline members, sworn or civilian in some instances as well, who are impacted by stress and mental health and PTSD specifically, with the presumptive legislation in the WSIB that we now live with in the province of Ontario. We will have shortages of staffing because of that impact, and in a good way, because we're asking people to come forward and look after themselves. So all that to say that when we have 750 sworn officers, we do not have 750 sworn officers able to come to work every day. And that's just another impact, which is behind the scenes and HR related of the overall impacts and stressors that are put on a police service these days. And it's incrementally different across different organizations. So we'll always endeavor to do the most that we can for our members internally. And I wanted to highlight that again when it comes to the additional one person working in the organizational wellness unit. But thank you very much for those words from members of the board.
Thanks, Chief. Members of the board, do we have any further questions or comments on the budget? Graham has a question or a comment.
Yeah, just wanted to bring to the board's attention that there is, as the chief noted, there is the slight difference in what is actually being recommended versus what was circulated as part of the report. It's the difference in the number of authorized sworn positions. I believe in the recommendation that was circulated in the report, it says 15. That should be 16. Am I getting that correct, Chief and Paul?
Yeah,
that's right. And then the civilian number goes from 8 to 7, I believe.
Correct.
So for the mover and seconder, I'm assuming that you're okay with that revision to your motion. Thank you, Kurt. Good, thank you. Further questions, comments? Okay, so the proposal as amended has been presented. It's been moved. It's been seconded. Any further comments or questions before I call the question? And just on that note, I wanted to just confirm, Graham, we're on for presenting our budget request to Regional Council on the 17th.
That is correct. It will be the 17th.
Thank you. So members of the board, well, the chief and I are the, I guess the presenters, predominantly the chief, but I will be speaking on behalf of the board. I would certainly encourage members of the board to attend council, particularly Councillor Somerville should attend council. But other members of the board are certainly welcome to join and be acknowledged for your work to our colleagues on council. I think it would be great if you could attend. Our council meetings start at 9:30 a.m. and we should be at the budget by what, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Graham? I'm just kidding. Our meetings have been running long lately, so you just never know anymore. But yeah, so if Graham, would you mind circulating that information to board members so that they know how they can attend that board meeting? It's also virtual, just FYI. So once again, members of the board, I'll last call for comments or questions before I call the question. I don't see any. I just want to say before I do call the question, a big thank you to Paul and his team for your work in pulling this together. Another great job. Thank you, sir. Thank you for the workshop that board members were able to participate in. That was a great opportunity for the board to really get to know and to own the budget that they have to present to council for support. We really appreciate that extra effort on behalf of the service, or on the part of the service, to help us become fully aware of your priorities, your needs, and it was a terrific opportunity. I look forward to that becoming our regular process each and every year going forward. And thank you, of course, to the chief and to his deputies for their great work in supporting this budget and getting the information to us and answering all the questions that we had along the process. It's been a terrific and iterative process, and it's very much appreciated. Oh, I'm sorry, the chief's going to speak before I call the vote. Yes, sir.
Oh, no.
Careful. I was about to call the vote. You may have got support.
I will wait. I will wait. Go ahead.
Okay, I'll ask the board, are there any objections to the motion to approve the amended recommendation, notwithstanding the fact that the chief has something up his sleeve? I don't see any objections. Therefore, that motion is approved as amended. Chief Tanner.
And now is a much better time to publicly thank Paul and Greg for their work behind the scenes and doing all the financial accounting side of our budget and presenting all the numbers. Thank you very much.
And I apologize, I forgot Greg when I was doing my thank yous. He's not immediately in my frame of view. I just see Paul. He's sort of this. He's Alice in my Brady Bunch shot at the moment. So thank you to Greg for his great work and being there to answer questions at our workshop as well. Paul, you had a comment?
Yes, if I could just briefly. So the budget process relies on a lot of work that's being done by the budget managers and the commanders of each bureau. And each year we focus on working with those budget managers and commanders to build their skills and their comfort with the budget process. And Greg and his team do a great job with that. And we're happy to say that each year the skill set gets better and better and better. So as we go through our process and roll up, we're much further ahead each year when it comes time to review them on a line by line basis. Our skill set is significant.
Well, I think I can safely say on behalf of the entire board, please pass on our gratitude for the great work on this for this job, for everybody that was involved in the budgetary process. Your board truly appreciates our team, and please let them know that. Okay, members of the board, let's move on, and I'm going to go backwards now to the item we skipped, which is 4.2, the proposed governance policies. We're dealing with the governance calendar and board stakeholder engagement. Members of the board, this has been presented in a report. I'm not sure if you want a presentation. It's pretty self-explanatory. The committee met. We're bringing forward recommendations for approval based on what you see in front of you. Are there any questions or comments on the part of the board? Or Fred, do you have anything that you want to add to this, or are you okay letting it?
I think it might be worth teeing up for, especially for the members of management that weren't part of the discussions, if that's okay, Mr. Chair.
I'm fine with that. Okay, go ahead.
Sure. So these are the final 2 of 10 governance policies. There are still 2 areas to address, which may or may not be separate governance policies or additions to them. And those being the evaluation processes and policy revision processes. Regarding the governance calendar.
And strategic planning.
That'll be an administrative policy because it involves the service.
True. Sorry.
Yes, good point, sir.
Yeah.
So essentially I've tried to organize the governance calendar, which will be the first board that's got something like this. That I'm aware of in the country. I've tried to lay it out as in the hierarchy of board decisions, although prefaced with orientation training for new board members. So it's organized in the governance calendar as orientation of new members, then policy and bylaw review or development, then strategic planning. Again, this will be linked to a separate policy on strategic planning, but it does provide the decision, a schedule of basically reports to the board for board decisions. So there are notably 6 touch points for the board in the next strategic planning process, according to this calendar, which is a significant increase from previous times. There's also then coordinated bargaining and executive contracts. There are 3 in the calendar. There may be more depending on what those contracts actually contain. Then the budget development, you'll note that next round we've started it in August. Yeah, so this is actually the first board meeting where there's been any formal presentation on the budgets. So there's significantly more time to this process next time. Then the policy compliance reports, and as I've mentioned previously, we currently don't have a schedule of them. There is one that's worked out between the board secretary and the chief secretary, which is very helpful, but we need to formalize that. This calendar outlines some of the things to be contained in those reports, and the actual reports and their timeframes will be flushed out in this policy once we have those new, so starting with the administrative policies, once they're adopted by the board. And of course, we'll be discussing all that with management, both the policies and the reporting schedules. Then the annual report, which is a new board responsibility in the new legislation, and there's 3 touch points on that as well, which is an increase from 1 to 2 in previous years. Then there's also provision for management requests, especially regarding personnel and money. And then there's a whole section on the evaluations. Of note in the evaluations and next cycle objectives, there's several that are here for November. Noting that as this is a new policy, we're going to have we've got a growth period, so we might not be able to hit all of these next November, but it's a start, and some of them have already been started offline. And that's the governance policy. So the main thing that needs to be added eventually is that detailed list of reports in accordance with the board's administrative policies, and ultimately the new adequacy standards when they're finally developed as well by the province. The second policy before you is the stakeholder engagement policy, and the review committee looked at 2 different options. One was if essentially liaisons were to be assigned to each stakeholder group. That is a requirement for the board to have stakeholder engagement in the strategic planning process, and the committee essentially decided that that's the place to address that, which would not be on an ongoing basis, but rather once every 4 years in strategic planning specifically. And the committee strongly recommended to go with a more flexible approach to stakeholder engagement, and that's the version before you. The final point on that is that that's it, that the strategic planning process policy would flush that out. That's the context on those 2 policies before you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Fred. Appreciate the update on that. I have questions from Clark first, and then Kurt.
Just a comment. I was going to say, Mr. Chair, that I really do appreciate yourself and the other members that have looked at the policies before they're coming to the board, just for that little overview. I think that's really an important piece where they can do that and sit down with the chief and staff and be able to look at them before they come up to the board for presentation. We may get the odd time where we have to slow down before we adopt a policy, but I think all of us are on the same vision of moving the policies forward and adopting them when they come up. So I'd be glad to move this at the appropriate time, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Clark. I will say that the committee process has been useful in in going through the documents in a less formal way. And I think we've added some value to them. They're largely as presented, but there's some tweaks that have been made by the committee, and I think they've been very useful. And the conversations have been quite useful as well to help bring the actual board members' perspective to the table, and to get also the feedback from particularly the chief's feedback on implementation of those policies. So thank you for that comment. Kurt, you're up next, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. First, I want to applaud all the work that's been done in this slate of governance policies. I look at these as a real cornerstone moving forward. And Fred, you've done a great job on this work, and I really appreciated it. I wonder if it would be appropriate, Mr. Chair, to just enlarge a little bit on the stakeholder engagement and how we may envision seeing that roll out for the benefit of the public that's perhaps watching, who may not have the understanding that we do of it, having not seen it at this point.
Sure. Well, let's turn to Fred and ask him to comment on that.
Yes, that's a great question, and it's also a huge one. So this is something that every board of directors is increasingly having to come to terms with, as the number of stakeholders, their types of issues, and the temperature of those issues increases. All sectors, every type of board. And according to the Institute of Corporate Directors, the most approach is a flexible one, but it has to be, it needs to be thoughtful. And while it is largely driven outside of a planning process by reaction, it does need to be one of the top of mind things for a board of directors. Essentially, this is where one of the areas where the difference between a governing body and management needs conscious understanding. And that difference is that the board of directors essentially is representing the community as owners of the public service, the police. Think of it as shareholders. And so the board of directors wants to engage stakeholders to hear what's perspectives that inform their understanding of what's in the best interests of the entire community. And those interests can often differ from what individual customers of that service are asking for. Management's perspective with stakeholders is largely one that will be, because the management role is to deliver services, will be typically more focused on customer demands. A prime example is, and we hear this frequently, is about traffic safety, and customers will demand, they want speed controlled is a common one, right? Or noise with regards to the trucks, Clark. Those are customer questions. Then they're expecting a service response, a service to be delivered to respond to that. Whereas the whole of the community approach that the board's looking for is, what are the results of community safety or traffic safety initiatives that we're looking for? And those are more likely to be along the lines of less traffic fatalities, less traffic collisions, less traffic disruptions. And then it's up to the board to prioritize what are all those different community views, come to some sort of consensual conclusion, and establish those results for which the service would, through its own resources and its partnerships, strive to achieve those results. And so in the case of traffic safety, if that result is less fatalities, one of the means at the service's disposal is speed control, but it's not the only one. A bit of a long-winded response to how the need for the board to understand what its stakeholders need, value, and expect is a slightly different perspective on it than management. And that is the case in any board management relationship in any sector. And we're just applying it to community safety here. I hope I answered your question, Kurt.
Kurt?
Yes, you did, Fred, and I thank you for that. I also want to highlight that, you know, the service has a lot of engagement with stakeholders every day.
Mm-hmm.
And this stakeholder engagement is not intended in any way to affect and influence or
That's right.
impede
Correct.
any of that. That will be an ongoing initiative. I think what I'm trying to focus on here somewhat is that, you know, with everything that's going on in society, the concern around social issues, concern around community safety and crime and all of that, it's incumbent upon the board to take its own read of that. Again, not impeding anything that the service does on very well on an everyday basis, but I think it's part of our responsibility. And I was just, you know, curious on and wanted you to elaborate on that, Fred, which you've done very well. Thanks. I'm satisfied with that.
Thanks, Kurt. I just want to emphasize something you just said because it's very important, and we talked about this at the committee. And Kurt, you hit the nail on the head, particularly when it came to the issue of that this policy and our role as civilian governors of the police service in no way supplants the valuable connections that the police service have with the stakeholders in the delivery of service. Both the preventative delivery of service as well as reactionary. So we recognize that as a board, and this is, in my estimation, one more step towards the recognition of our role as being the voice of the community into the governance and oversights of the police service. And I mean, honestly, I don't even know. You know, I'm shocked the province hasn't put more standards in our regulations with respect to this, but you know, in the absence of that, you know, we're taking this initiative, like our entire governance initiative, to make sure that we provide that opportunity to get the stakeholders, you know, our shareholders, as Fred likes to refer to them, get their perspective on the work of the policy delivery and creation, and again, the governance and oversights of the police service. So to the deputies and other members of the service that are on here, this is not your board trying to get between you and your customers. This is simply us wanting to engage as well so we can do our job better. So thank you for drawing that out, Kurt. That was a very good point. I appreciate that very much. Members of the board, are there further questions on this? Ingrid, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Not a question, but I just wanted to acknowledge the good work that has been done by the committee members and Fred. It's very encouraging to see how far advanced we are in the area of policy development and as we continue to evolve in this important area. So thank you to all the members who have been involved in getting us this far. Thank you.
Thanks, Ingrid. Anything further? Okay, I think the clerk had moved the recommendation. Can I get a seconder for that, please? Ingrid, thank you very much. Further comments or questions? Any objection to the approval? Seeing none, that's approved. Thank you very much, and well done to everybody on this. And once again, thank you, Fred, for your leadership on all of our new governance policies, and send our best to your assistant on this matter as well, Svetlana, who works hard behind the scenes with Fred in drafting these documents to make sure that they are letter perfect and reflect not only the intent of the board, but also very clearly the law. So moving on to 4.4, this is a happy task. We are, I believe, we have the president of the Canadian Caribbean Association for Halton with us, who I would ask Graham if you could show him into the room. That would be great. Andrew Terrell's with us today, former board member and a friend of all of ours. Andrew is with us today for any questions on this particular issue. I'm hoping everybody had a chance to read the request from Andrew for support of the association. We have the funds available through our trust fund, and I believe that if there ever was a better purpose for use of those trust funds, I can't imagine it. But to support the request, I thought I would ask Andrew to say a few words to the board. Welcome back to the board, Andrew. Nice to see you.
Hello there. Can you hear me?
I can hear you perfectly. Thank you.
All right, great, good.
Like I said, welcome back to the board, maybe in an unofficial capacity, but it's nice to see you here. Maybe you could just give us a bit of a 30,000-foot level about your organization for those who may not be as familiar. And to the 19 people watching us live on YouTube, perhaps they would learn something as well. And also maybe just discuss your request for board consideration today.
All right, great. Well, first of all, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to be before you and for you to consider this request. I see a lot of my friends here, the Clark, we were on the board together, the chief, the deputies. And I just say that because the CCH has had a long history with the Halton Regional Police Service. I think that you'll see in my submission there that we have been around for 40 years. And we've always worked really close with the service. I remember that not too many years ago, there was an individual by the name of, that you people may not have heard of him, by the name of Nishan Durayapa. And he was a young sergeant at the time, and he came into the community mobilization department, and he really, I think he was just an authorized strength of just one, and now the Community Mobilization Bureau is probably 70 or so. And that was really the start of what community policing was, and our formal, the CCH's formal meetings with the police. And at that time, the chief of the day had a chief's forum that we were instrumental in creating and starting. But I've been on the police board. There is another one of our CCH directors, Richard Pinnock, who's been I believe a lecturer at the HRPS Peace Program for a number of years as well. But the Canadian Caribbean Association of Halton is a charity that has been around we're in our 44th year now. And really what it's about is we have 4 pillars, which is community, culture, education, and harmony. And that's really the basis for what we do in Halton. There's a number of programs that we have undertaken in Halton. Just in relation to the pandemic, supporting the community, we have had a meals program where we have distributed over 14,000 meals. We have intergenerational music programs. We have an Emancipation Day program all across the region where we entertain hundreds of people, teach them about Black history. We're in both of the school boards. We have scholarships at the school boards. We're entrenched in the curriculum. We have a number of our events are supported by the Oakville Hospital volunteers. The police auxiliary assist us as well. Ryan Smith is a sergeant in the Community Mobilization Bureau, and he sits on our board of directors. And for quite some time, we've had somebody from the chief of the day to designate to sit on our board of directors to really direct what we do. But the essence of my request is that due to the pandemic, we have had a shortfall, as all community agencies, organizations like us have had a shortfall in our donations. And specifically in relation to the youth leadership program, we have a program where we dedicate 5 hours to the police, and the police service put together a fantastic workshop. And this year we had over 200 youth attend that workshop, and we provided them with an anonymous survey afterwards. And 98.4 of them said that it was a great use of their time. They wanted to see more, and they were likely to tell their friends and their fellow students to come as well the next time that we put it on. So that has been an annual thing that the force, the police service, and CCH has done since I think we're in our 15th year now. And really that what COVID has taught us is that like the virtual format that you're in right now, is that that's really the way of the future. Prior to that, we were more constrained with, I guess, getting people in seats in a forum, in a venue. And now we've realized that via the virtual format that this year we had 200 kids, and that's only the beginning of it. So what we plan to do for the subsequent years is to have a in-person program, as we've done in years gone by, but have that live streamed as well. And that's going to add some cost to the way that we go about delivering that program. But adding that cost at a time when our donations are down as well is the reason why we are coming to you, but also to just assist us to continue to deliver those programs. A lot of the charities who've been hit by COVID, they have simply stopped delivering programs or have reduced the amount of programs, and we are the opposite. We have expanded because of the community demand. We've expanded the types of things that we do. So, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for this opportunity, and that's the reason why I'm coming to you on behalf of the CCH and requesting these funds.
Thanks for the summary, Andrew. I just want to turn to the chief for a second. I know the chief feels very strongly about this request as well. He sent the board members an endorsement of the request. So maybe, Chief, do you have a couple words on this particular matter?
Absolutely, and it goes as important as the relationships are, and they are also important with our diverse communities. And it's a fabulous relationship we've had with CCAH for many, many years through the Halton Regional Police and various members, individuals, and the entire service. But it really is a unique organization in a unique time, who are helping us and helping all of society get the messages across about the importance of Black history, about the importance that organizations such as our own or far beyond the Halton Regional Police Service really do much more work and a much better job of addressing systemic discrimination and racism in any form and hatred in any form. And I fully endorse the board supporting CCAH in this request, and specifically because of the programming that they do in connection with us. It's a perfect connection for the board to support that initiative. Thank you.
And before I turn to Clark, who has a question, I just want to also add my endorsement for the request. Maybe the chair shouldn't be doing that and has to remain impartial, but I feel very strongly about this request. I feel very strongly about the organization. My own, unfortunately, deceased godson was actively involved with the association as a young Black man, and got great value and was set straight a few times by Andrew's mom. Certainly I've seen the value of my community. I've had the honor and privilege of attending a number of their events that have been held at Town Hall and throughout the community. And plus being a witness on this board for the, I think, I don't even know how many years I've been on the board now. It's been 8 or 9 years. I can't recall, but hearing of the valuable interactions and partnerships between the organization and the service has been it's just shown the value of the relationship, and certainly the value add that this small contribution to their budget would make. And just to remind members of the board, this is not a budgetary matter for us as a board. This comes from our trust funds, which again, as I said earlier, are designated for exactly this kind of thing. And if there ever was a better use of a contribution from our trust fund, I can't imagine it. So I'm fully in support of this as well. And with that, I have two speakers. Clark wishes to ask a question or comment, and Kurt is next.
Well, Mr. Chair, it'd be hard pressed not to follow in the words from both yourself and the chief. But Andrew, thank you for being here. And yes, it is a long time because we were on the board together a number of years ago. We will put it that way. But it is great to see you. And thank you so much for the work the organization does. I took one of my nieces with me a couple of years ago to see the Emancipation Day art show that they had on. And she was just completely blown away by seeing the artwork and learning the history of it. And also having a chance to have a chat with your mother when she was there as well. And she refers back to this from 3 or 4 years ago about going to that art show. She still talks about it. So when you have a young lady like that who was that impressed from seeing the show and keeps referring to it, it tells you the organization is doing great work. Like you, Chair, I've attended a number of the events. This is a first-class organization. This is exactly what our trust funds are designed to do, is to support organizations like this. And I will be gladly supporting this. I will move it or second it, depending on, whoever is first. I don't mind if somebody else wants to second it, but I am wholeheartedly will be endorsing this. And thank you for being here today, Andrew.
Thanks, Clark. Kurt's up next.
Well, thank you very much, Andrew, for coming before us today. I really appreciate, as others have said, all the work that your organization does. I'm very familiar and have traveled extensively in various parts of the Caribbean and have met a lot of Caribbean Canadians. I think this is an extremely important initiative, an extremely important request, and I'd be pleased to second a motion to move it along.
Thanks, Kurt. And Ingrid's up next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Andrew, I just wanted to compliment you on your beautifully written letter. It's very articulate, and it's so wonderful to see how a prosperous and rewarding relationship has developed over so many years. So compliments to you and the people that you're working with. And I also so appreciated the chronology of the history of the chiefs that you've included. It was extremely beneficial to know who covered this important role all the way back to 1974. So good to have you with us, Andrew. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ingrid. I will point out that probably my fondest memory of the association is a young fellow actually teaching me how to play the steel drums about 15 or 16 years ago at a concert. I think it was River Oaks Rec Center. It was being held in. I'm a drummer from way back, and I'd never tried a steel drum, and I got the opportunity to actually try it out. I'm really bad, but it was still fun to try. And I promise I will not regale the board with my steel drumming prowess. Anyway, members of the board, the proposal before us is to contribute $10,000 from our trust fund. We have a mover in the form of Clark Somerville and a seconder in the shape of a Kurt Allen. And I would ask the members of the board, are there any further questions or comments on this proposal? I don't see any. Graham, are you good with that motion? Thank you. Any objection to the approval of this request? Seeing none, that's approved. Andrew, you have your $10,000. Our best wishes to you and to your board and your members, and keep up the great work. And we look forward to seeing you again real soon. And let us know how else we can support you going forward.
Thank you very much. And I'd just like to say that this is going to go a long way to us sustaining the types of programs that we have for Halton residents. And I have a huge team behind me, so I'd like to thank them as well for putting this request together and we will move forward. And I will definitely extend a personal invitation to all of you for our next event. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank Richard for us. I know he stuck around as long as he could, but I know he had to take off. So thank him for
Thank you.
sticking with us as long as he did. Thanks, Andrew.
All right. Bye-bye.
Okay, members of the board, next up is operational verbal updates, but I'm going to use Chair's prerogative and declare a quick 5-minute bio break. It is now 10:55. We're going to reconvene at 11 o'clock.
Mr. Allen, you're unmuted. Not sure if you know that.
Thanks for that.
No problem.
Okay, members of the board, I think we're all here. Yeah, it looks like it. Okay, let's move on to our next agenda item, which is number 5, operational verbal updates. Chief?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think Deputy Chief Wilkie has one.
Good morning, and through the chair, I just wanted to provide a quick update with regards to a new campaign that we're launching called No Hate in Halton. We've had some TV press yesterday. It's going to be going live as of November 8th. And basically what it hits on is something that we've talked about at great length at the board level with regards to hate crime increasing globally and also within our own community. One thing that we've looked at in terms of statistics for 2020 throughout the pandemic is that 42% of the hate crime incidents involve schools or school-aged youth. And as a result, I mean, you've had delegations from youth in Oak Hill schools that have come and spoke to the board. In response to that, we've undertaken a collaborative effort with the school boards and a number of key stakeholders in the community to develop this program. Crime Stoppers is a heavy hitter in this space with us. And what we're trying to do really is leverage the input from our Youth Advisory Council and the school boards to better understand the needs of how we can better educate and increase awareness of what hate crime is and the difference between hate incidents. And so we want to decrease the stigma, obviously educate and promote awareness of what this is and how it's impacting our community, and then build a sense of community through this initiative. And so Crime Stoppers is going to be has developed a QR code, which will be posted throughout schools in Halton, which makes it very easy to report an incident because we want that to be an easy mechanism for people to report these matters anonymously if that gives them that sense of safety. And then part of this phase 2 is to mobilize schools to develop their own initiatives and their own policies in this space, because we can't be everything to everyone and we can't be present in all schools. And so we're really looking forward to launching this initiative on November 8th. It's not a one and done. This is something that will actually run throughout the course of the school year, and as well as the 22 and 23 school year, and then be assessed by the boards to determine its relevancy and effectiveness. So it's a sustainable solution. Obviously, the ultimate goal here is to eliminate all forms of hate and to better support victims and our community. So have a look for that. The social media platforms will be launching this. We wanted to drive it through social media because that's where kids live and it's about them. And so we will be using hashtag No Hate in Halton. You'll see that on our channels, and we look forward to sharing some of the results through some de-identified information from Crime Stoppers and our school boards and our school liaison officers. So stay tuned for that.
That's a great initiative. Thanks, Chief, our deputy. Anything further?
Well, I think we're good for the next session.
Okay. Members of the board, any questions for the deputy? I don't see any, so let's move along. Members of the board, I draw your attention to the action registry. I don't believe that we have any actions on that today, but it's here for your information. If you have any questions or comments. Can I get a motion to receive the action registry, please? Kurt, and how about you, Ingrid? Ingrid? I think she's stuck. I need a seconder. Oh, Ingrid, would you mind seconding the receiving the action registry? I need a mover and seconder, and I've lost a board member, so thank you. Okay. Any objection to receipt? Seeing none, that is approved. You've had your public correspondence circulated through Dilla Trust. Does anybody wish to put any of those matters on the table, or are we satisfied to receive the correspondence received? Okay, can I get a motion to receive the correspondence, please? Ingrid, and I'm gonna need Kurt. Thank you, Kurt. I don't know if, I hope Clark's still there. Any objections to receipt? And that is carried. Thank you very much. I know Councillor Somerville has to leave at 12. So I know I'd like to try to get through as much of the agenda, because we've also unfortunately had to allow Don to deal with other business as well. So we are slim on our board attendance. So I need everybody to help me with the moving and seconding as we move forward. Is there any new business to come before the board? I don't see any. Can I get a motion to go into closed session for our confidential portion of the agenda today? Thank you, Kurt. Seconded by Ingrid. Thank you very much. Any objection to going into public session? Sorry, closed session? I don't see any. So, oh, I'm sorry, Fred, you're objecting?
The action registry?
We dealt with that.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
No problem. No problem. Seeing there's no objection, we'll move into closed session. And I just wanted to say a big thank you to those who are leaving us. I understand from Kimberly, our communications advisor, that we had, I think we peaked out at 25 live viewers on YouTube, which is awesome, that the public are taking that level of interest in their police service. So thank you to all of you. Thank you to those as well that are participating with us on Zoom. I know that there was as many at one point as 6. There's only 2 right now, but we appreciate you being here as well and paying close attention to the business of your board. There's Kimberly. Did we peak out beyond the 25, Kimberly? No, okay. I'm in the film and television business. I'm all about ratings, so the 25 are important. Okay, members of the board, we have moved to go into camera. That motion was approved. Therefore, we are moving into closed session. Once again, thank you to the public. The public portion of this meeting is now at an end. Thank you, everybody. And I'll remind members of the board